There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. That's great to see you all here so early in the morning. Thank you for coming. So this morning, we're going to talk a little bit about what stage of development your child is in and what are the best education options for them, whether you're considering home education for the first time, or even online school, or maybe a shared responsibility type of program. We live in Alberta, so there are a ton of choices. And parents often tell me there are too many choices. I feel overwhelmed by all of this. So I'm hoping to just clarify some things for you this morning so you don't feel overwhelmed. But if you do, just feel free to ask questions. So this is me. I'm Judy. I teach child development. That was my work before COVID. Now I do most teaching online. So I'm very familiar with the brain. I'm certified in the brain story and also the growing brain from 0 to 3, which is actually 0 to 5. I'm a non-punitive parenting specialist, and that spills over into education as well. I don't practice non-punitive parenting and expect my kids to have a learning environment where they're punished or coerced to do somebody's work. That's just not me. And then my book on education is on unschooling. So I will tell a little bit about our story later. And don't forget, we have a Facebook group called Unschooling STEM because, surprise, surprise, 4 of my 5 kids went into STEM programs while unschooling. So how did they do that? I will answer your questions. Absolutely. But join our Facebook group. And I have a blog which outlines a lot of our adventures, and anything that's not in the book, I put up there on the blog, especially in response to people's questions. I also have a parenting blog too, if you're interested in learning more about non-punitive parenting. Lots of articles and suggestions up there. Okay, so we love teachers and we love learning. I'm sure we all do. We all want the best for our children, but sometimes it's really hard to find out what that best is. Sometimes we don't find it in the system as it is now. There are a lot of people unhappy with the system and the coming draft curriculum. And we just think that there is a lot of improvement, and that's why people look for alternatives and seek options, whether in the school system or outside the school system. And teachers are great. We love teachers. Every teacher should have a tip jar on their table. They do a fantastic job. So it's important to recognize that education happens all the time, everywhere. Every child, from the minute they're born to the minute they leave this earth, learn. We all learn. We're continuing learning. And school is only one way to learn. These are all the other ways to learn. This list was derived from the Inspiring Education talks by the Alberta government in 2009, which is now, gosh, that's 12 years ago now, when they were trying to bring in a new curriculum back then. And actually, it was funny. Back then, they posed the question, what should our education system look like for the next 50 years? And pretty well, as they're designing the curriculum, that's what they're looking at. What do kids need to know that will equip them for the next 50 years? And quite a lot of what they need to know will not be found in schools. It will be found through a lot of these other venues. Okay, now it's important when you're looking at education options, who makes the decisions, who delivers the education, and who assesses it? That is the number one boundaries or perimeter you look at when you're looking at options. Pretty well, the only education option where you make all the decisions, everything regarding delivery, resources, curriculum, assessment, marks, everything. The only option is home education. That's it. It's often called parent-led, traditional, Code 600, everything else that is out there. So when you go to the school board meet and greets, anything they talk about that is not home education is school. It's governed by the government, by the system, by Alberta Education, by the school boards. You have zero decision-making ability, other than the only decision you have is, should I sign my child up or not? Okay. Are we clear on that? So it's no longer, especially with the hybrid models now coming out, back 20 years ago, it was very interesting how online schooling, people thought it was homeschooling, it was home education. Even in this past year with COVID, you can tell everybody's talking about homeschooling, but it's not homeschooling. It's parents supervising school in their living room. Not the same. It's a matter of responsibility. Who controls the education? So in the government provides for schools. Okay, so, and there's a whole variety out there. There's what we call blended. Now, blended used to mean half parent controlled, half school controlled. But in the big, wider education world across all countries, blended came to mean a hybrid model of school, which was half online, half in person. So as universities took over that term, and it's called different things too, flipped classroom, it's called hybrid models, but it really is all school responsible. So we don't use that term anymore in Alberta education. The term we use now for part parent responsible, part school responsible is called shared responsibility. Okay, and then the percentage of those shares are what determines what percent parent handles, what percent the school handles. Okay, so be very clear on what you're signing up for, because it's very murky out there. During COVID, a lot of school boards were using home education or homeschooling to mean online. And whether it was done deliberately or mistakenly, doesn't matter, but it was misleading for parents. So parents thought they were signing up for homeschooling or home education and ended up on an online program and thought, okay, wait, why don't I have no control on this? So it's very important. So blended now is school. It's variations of school. So part classroom, part print, part online, but it is school. Hybrids are school. Outdoor forest programs are usually school, okay? The only thing in Alberta education that is parent-controlled is home education, and that's the wording they use. There's no homeschooling in Alberta education anywhere in their documents. Okay, so, and the beauty is students are now borderless, really. They can learn from any course or resources anywhere in the world. When we talk about online, we're not just meaning Calgary Board of Education or Edmonton Public online courses. Those are Alberta government onlines. You can have your children learn from any course anywhere in the world, whether it be OutSchool or Khan Academy or Elon Musk school is Ad Astra. They can take online courses from that, but it's outside of the Alberta education system, right? They can do it under home education. So online can be under home education as long as it's outside the Alberta school system. It has to be clear that way, because then it's still parent provided and responsible. So what's the future? Well, I think the future is not so much where kids learn, it's proving their qualifications, either by portfolio or exams or some way of proving they know what they know. And boundaries become less and less important. We know that from the closing of Alberta Distance Learning. That closed because so many other school boards now were offering what they offered, that boundaries were becoming less important. So here are your choices pretty well. Now, all three of these choices, the private independent schools, the public or Catholic schools, the charter or Francophone schools, all have to teach the Alberta programs of study. They're all looking at the draft curriculum now with really intent eyes because they have to follow it. What are the differences there? Well, if you sign your child up for an independent school that charges $25,000 a year for tuition, they're still going to learn about small crawling and flying animals in grade 1 science. Absolutely. They will learn that in all three of these choices. But they may learn it by going on a field trip to Africa because you're paying that money. Whereas in a public school, they'll still learn the same topic, but maybe they'll watch a film about it in the classroom or have a little live terrarium about that, right? So it's still meeting the same outcomes, and Alberta education is all outcome-based. It's not, you don't have to teach anything. Even schools do not have to use certain resources to teach. They have a wide leeway. Teachers have a leeway of how they're going to teach, using what resources. So that's what they do. So it varies how they teach it, but in all three of these areas, children are going to learn the same Alberta programs of study outcomes. Now, here's the anomaly, is home education. You can teach to the Alberta programs of study outcomes, or you can teach the 22 very broad schedule of learning outcomes in the home education regulations. So those are 22 outcomes your child has to meet by the time they turn 20. So you don't even have to follow those every year. Every year, you just have to provide a program that covers math, science, social, and English. You know what? You can do that by baking cookies with your children. You can cover all those. And if you do it once per the year, so you bake cookies with your child once during the year, you are providing a program in those 4 course areas. It's super easy. They can play Minecraft all year and cover off those outcomes. It's super, super easy. Okay, once your child takes a government classroom class, a print-based portion of the program, or an online-based portion of the program, they are now in school. So school's making all the decisions and is responsible for that. You are not. You are only responsible in the shared responsibility portion for your part. Okay, and all of these are governed in the system. So we are part of the system whether we want to or not. How do you know? Well, if you're not sure, here are the codes that when you sign your child up for school or you notify for home education, those are the codes they fall under. And there is a code now for the government notification, but I don't know it yet. And that reminds me, I have to ask the government what that code is because they keep track. So we are governed, if you're under home education, you're governed under the home education regulations, but within the Alberta Education Funding Guide, within the Alberta Education Guide to Education, and within the Alberta Education Act. So all 4 of those documents apply to home education. All 3 of these apply to schools and teacher-directed and online. Okay, so let's say you want to go to a government school. Now, you can choose some schools. You're going to find out in the meet and greet that a lot of schools are offering hybrids of online, classroom. They're all school. So that's what they call blended now. Blended. You can sign your children up for classroom schools, for print-based. So print-based is correspondence, basically. So print-based is, I think, one of the most hardest educational choice because you sign your children up, your teacher who's teaching that class assigns resources. You get a box delivered to your door in September. And for the most part, your child has to be very self-directed. It is designed to teach your child the whole course, but your child has to be very self-directed in order to learn the course without your input, because you are not supposed to teach on that. Now, obviously, that's not going to work very well for children ages 0 to 12. Generally, schools expect children about grade 7 to start becoming more independent in their learning. So less parents pressuring them to do their homework, to do their assignments, more onus on the child to get their work done. And you can see that in the online classes where most teachers are on with students, not with the parents. They don't want to see the parents. They don't want to talk to the parents. Their relationship with the student, and they have ways of getting the students to do their work, right? So you have choices. You have classroom. Maybe your child is not an online child. And this depends on your child's learning style. Out of my 5 kids, 2 of them were not online learners. So once we reached high school, we made sure that their very difficult courses were classroom taught or classroom taught. They had to have in person. So print-based is, so that's classroom. Print-based. Online, again, works for some kids, doesn't work for other kids. Now, when you're interviewing school boards, find out, is it synchronous online, which means that a child has to get up, be at their computer at 9 a.m. for a Zoom class, because that will keep them more accountable. If it's asynchronous and it's like, oh, you have a week to do this assignment and watch this video, make sure it's in by Sunday night. Well, Sunday night at 11 p.m., your child's going to be groaning and you're going to be pulling your hair out like I did. Because a lot of times kids aren't very good at pacing themselves. We adults are not very good at pacing ourselves. So be aware of that difference in online courses. Are they synchronous, which means live in real time, or are they asynchronous, which means your child's going to procrastinate, as normal kids do? And again, there's 4 schools too that are out there. I don't know if they're going to be operating this fall, but maybe, right? Okay, now then there's home education. Now, home education in Alberta means that you are taking back your child's responsibility, the education of your child. You own it when they're born. You own it. Alberta has made that clear in the Education Act this previous year. Yay! And when you sign them up for school, you're handing it over to the school. When you're notifying for home education, you're taking it back and you're saying, I am going to be responsible for my child's education from here on in. Well, or for this year. Now, that doesn't mean you have to teach. Yay, because I can't teach math past grade 8. And I had 4 kids in STEM. So how are they going to learn it, right? They had to self-teach. We could hire tutors. We could hire teachers. We could form homeschooling co-ops. We could get our childcare people to teach them. I tell you, my teenagers, they were very good at math when I hired teenagers as babysitters, and I'd like, oh, could you help with homework? I'll pay you extra, right? Wherever they can get the education, you get it. You can outsource to non-government online schools like Khan Academy, OutSchool, all those outline schools. So you can procure your child's education. Right. And the beauty of that is you're not signing them up for an online course, which lasts 8 hours a day. You're signing them up for 1 hour course on how to code a website or something, right? So it's very short, very a la carte. It's what your kids want to follow, interests like that. So those are definitely options, but only under home education. And you can also follow a philosophy of unschooling, which is pretty well play until kids want to do more. Now, you can totally unschool from 0 to probably grade 9, which is 15. And then you can decide, I'm going to move over from meeting those 22 solo outcomes, and we're going to flip over and do more meet the Alberta Programs of Study outcomes for high school courses. If you do that, your children can get marks and credits and a diploma under Alberta education. You just have to pick the right board. There's only about 13 school boards that offer a portfolio review for marks and credits, so be sure you got the right one. And more, every year we're getting more and more boards doing that, so that's great, yay! So basically, unschooling is empowering your child to learn through however they learn, through play, through projects, through exploration, through anything they find in your house. It's a much easier way to home educate because there's no motivation problems because you're not bribing or coercing them to do assignments they don't want to do. And in a way, it's a lot harder because you don't do school for half an hour and then pack it away. It's ongoing. At 11 p.m., your child's going to want to know if they plant an egg in the backyard, will it grow an egg tree? Right? So you do need some boundaries around that if you want a more structured life. But for the most part, it works really well for a lot of children. But a lot of children are more structured. That's their personality. They want more structure. So maybe that won't work for those kids. But you know your children best on what works. So I'm not going to go too much into free unschooling, but it's pretty well just they need a facilitator, which is you, to help them get what they need to do whatever they want. They need resources, which, can be as basic as a library card or internet, and they need lots of free time. That's it. Pretty easy. So what do? You just offer time and resources, and they pick and choose whatever they want to learn pretty well. What do they do all day? These are things they do. They read, they research, they play, they game, they chores, they fight. There you go. Check off that gets along, works well with a group type of outcome. Field trips when we're not in a COVID year. They cook, they do crafts, they do projects, they volunteer. And as they get older, they run a small business. They're very busy. Kind of like when you ask a retiree, wow, what do you do all day with your time? And retirees tell you, well, I'm really busy. My week is very structured. Unschoolers are too. Their week can be structured with outside activities, with home days, with chore days, with play days, but they're very busy and they learn through life pretty well. Okay, guaranteed. I want to just assure you, no matter what education option you pick, you will not mess up your kids. Not. They will keep on learning no matter what. You can't force a child to learn, and you cannot stop a child from learning. Absolutely not. So I just will tell you in my story. I had 5 kids. They were in the system. They were in grades 1 and 2 when I pulled them out because their learning needs were not met. I had one child with a learning disability and one child who was smart and was bored. So big range of spectrum there, all my kids with 5 kids. So I pulled them out to do homeschooling that year. And you can see how wonderful that year was. My now engineer wrote on his math book in grade 2, I hate mathematics. Many times they were sitting at the table crying. Now, he must have, along the way, loved mathematics as we dropped homeschooling to unschool, because now he's an engineer and he works in a really good job on cybersecurity. But so we did that until high school. And then, like I said, in high school, we switched from the 22 solo outcomes to meeting the outcomes of the Alberta Programs of Study, but through a self-designed high school program. If they didn't want to do Shakespeare, we didn't do Shakespeare. If you sign your kids up for online, they have to do Shakespeare. So a lot more flexibility there. They wrote exams. I should change this because they've written more. And their average mark was 78%. They did about 10 exams in the STEMs too. And when the provincial average is 65%, I figure they didn't do too badly for unschooling 9 grades. And they got the scholarships. So 3 are university graduates. One is in 3rd year, one's a master's student, and one is still deciding what he's going to do for his life. Now, all the major Canadian universities do not require a diploma for acceptance. Absolutely not. I checked. Waterloo, Queen's, UVic, UBC do not require a diploma. What they require is grade 12 courses from or proven qualifications in grade 12 courses. And depending on the program, STEM programs are very competitive now. They need good marks. The average entrance is about, for STEM programs, is anywhere from 80%, but more common, 85, 90%. And you wonder why grade inflation is happening in schools. So anyways, I've written this book about 30 of my friends' kids and my kids' friends that all went to university at the same time. They unschooled 3 to 12 years. They were all accepted to college, tech, and university, and 22 have already graduated. We had 10 kids in STEM, and 4 of those were engineers. So it works. Okay, what about your kids? I like this quote from Dr. Thomas Armstrong. Human development research should inform educational practice. Gee, you know, those curriculum, people should read Dr. Armstrong because it's true. I'm going to just show you, I love this little video of, this is what learning looks like in your child's brain. So what happens here is these are brain neurons. This is an axon right here, an axon terminal, and it's reaching out to a dendrite of a neighboring neuron. And this is a gap called a synapse, and it's putting neurotransmitters across that gap. This is what we call brain connections. This is learning in action. And this is happening whether your child's playing a video game or doing a math workbook. They learn constantly. So when the news says children are behind in their learning, that is not true. What they're behind in is the government agenda, but they are still learning, especially in math and English. I love that video. Okay, so, so you can see how many connections are here at birth versus age 7 versus age 15. So by age 7, the brain has so many connections, it needs to start pruning the connections that are sticking. So what children are learning and repeating is those connections that strengthen and stay there. So like the new curriculum, if a child is fed all this information in grade 7, if they're not going to learn it on a continual basis or use it daily, they're going to lose it. So what's the point of teaching it until they need it, right? So just keep that in mind. Okay, brain development. Let's look at what's the best education options for brain development. So basically, the brain grows from the bottom to the top and from the back to the front. So babies have a very well-developed bottom brain functions. The brainstem, the cerebellum, and the occipital lobe are very well developed in babies. Toddlers start developing their temporal lobe. Preschoolers start developing the parietal lobe. And think first grade, frontal lobe. So grades 1 to 6, that frontal lobe is really coming into action. And then teenagers from age 13 on to 25, that prefrontal lobe right here, the last part of the brain to develop. So based on that, this is my, my drawing, yay, right? So let's look at babies and toddlers and older toddlers. They all learn to walk which is something we don't teach. It's developmentally ingrained. They all learn to walk. Same with older toddlers. They learn to talk. And that's something we don't teach either. We teach it by modeling it and talking to them. Again, that's developmentally ingrained. So this is the development of self-control pretty well, or one component of executive function. You can see here from 0 to 3, children have very little self-control. But from 3 until 6, they're really gaining in a big leap here in terms of self-control. That's why school doesn't start until age 6, age 7 in Sweden, and age 4 in England. So they yell at their kids a lot to sit still because they don't have a whole lot of self-control. No, actually in age 4, it's more play school. It's nursery school, so it's play-based. But age 6 is when children are expected to sit in desks, pay attention for short periods of time, and listen. And they need that certain amount of self-control to do that. Here, look at age 13. This is when a lot of children are expected to be more independent in their learning. So this is a good time that kids can start going online here. But until then, experiential learning is best. So, and here at age 17 is where you're going to see a real uptake in self-control, motivation, as children see their friends planning for post-secondary, for career aspirations. They get that nudge to start planning their own. And if you're anywhere from 25 to 50, it's going downhill. So, babies, toddlers, and preschoolers, most of them learn through play. So not through 2-dimensional screens, they learn through 3-dimensional, all their senses. So hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, tasting, everything goes in their mouth. So best education option here is either unschooling or play, everything play, including kindergarten. We've got that question a lot this year is kindergarten. I need some workbooks. I need some curriculum for kindergarten. In school, curriculum is play. It's centers. Kids learn centers. They learn how to line up. They learn social skills. They learn how to increasingly pay attention and self-control. That is what kindergarten is. And it's designed to prepare them for a classroom experience for grades 1 to 12. If you're homeschooling, they don't need to learn to line up unless you have 10 kids. They don't need to learn how to sit and pay attention for 30 minutes because most of homeschooling is not like school. It is different. You can teach through experiential ways. You can go on field trips. You can get them in the kitchen and baking and a lot more hands-on. You can do a lot more home educating that is not paper-based than they can do in classrooms. So that's why the big push is on to get kids to pay attention, sit still, listen to the teacher, and learn to read so that in grades 4, they're going to read to learn. That is preparation for school, but you don't have to do that at home. So these are really good play materials for ages 0 to age 12. So children learn best through self-directed learning and play. Okay. Now, if you're a working parent, how do you do that? If they're at home and you're trying to homeschool, use babysitting co-ops. Hire a teen to come over and play with them. Make sure you rotate your toys. So put things away for a month, then bring them out again. It's like a new toy. And ease up your screen time rules. And there's lots of play ideas at my blog. Okay, let's look at the traditional school year. So let's look at grades 1 to grade 6. Okay, children are not very abstract yet. They're thinking, their brain development is in terms of logical, concrete, tangible. So most of the Alberta programs of study outcomes, well, before the new curriculum comes in, relate to children, things children experience in their life during those ages. So it's very age appropriate right now, actually. So planes, flight, wetlands, the rock cycle, magnets, water, boats and buoyancy, all those topics address what's happening in their children's life. In social studies, it's my family, my community. They look a little bit at Japan, at Brazil, at Peru, but on a very, very superficial basis because they've never been there. It's abstract to them, but there's enough picture books in the library that can show them the differences between Japan and Peru and Brazil. So it has to be in the child's environment so they can see it, touch it, smell it, taste it, hear it. It has to be experiential. And although schools are very still paper-based, they really try to make the learning come alive through experiential opportunities. So that's why kindergarten has a lot of field trips in school. Grade 1, they get 1 or 2 field trips a year just because of the logistics. But that doesn't mean you can't. You can take them out on a field trip every week, every day if you want to. Kids learn best through science centers, through watching Magic School Bus, things that they can relate to. Fun things, basically. Now, at this age, kids aren't putting things in their mouths anymore, so they're not really tasting things, but more talking about it. They're real chatterboxes about learning. And during this age, they learn to read. That's not a skill we teach, it's a skill that they get. Okay, I'm just burning through this because I'm trying to get time for questions here. I'm not going to talk about this much. Best education options then for grades 1 to 6 are parent homeschooling. Maybe your child care professional can homeschool, getting them into parent co-ops that are homeschooling. Maybe you want to go the self-directed or the unschooling route. I would not recommend online schooling for these ages, just because of that self-control slide I showed you. You're going to be having to sit next to them, nag them, bribe them, punish them to do the work, do the assignments, pay attention. And I sympathize with schools. They have to deliver education. They have to do it. And during COVID, that's sometimes the only option. But it doesn't mean that it's the best option for a lot of children. Before COVID, online programs had a 50% dropout rate, probably even more through ADLC. They released that statistic. It was around 50%. Because we know that people, they start something, they don't finish it. They need self-discipline and motivation to finish it, and kids don't have it. And parents are busy working, looking after other children. They don't have the time to sit there and motivate kids either. And online classes are not the most engaging. Believe me, some of them are atrocious, atrocious. Best education is something three-dimensional, experiential, things they can put their hands on and do and interact with. Absolutely. So if you can find that in the a la carte online courses, keep them to minimal time, 1 course a day, maybe online, 1 hour a day. Or government schools, those outdoor programs are really great. Okay, teen years. Now, they're starting to think more abstractly, that prefrontal cortex, a lot of critical thinking happening. Now, I'm not saying teenagers don't learn best through three-dimensional, but they also can learn through online classes, paper-based resources. They're ready for paperwork now. So my 5 kids, we didn't do any math until this age. This was when they were ready. I shouldn't say we didn't do any math. We did math through baking, through selling Girl Guide cookies, through having a lemonade stand, all fun ways of doing math and learning its relevancy. So math has to be taught in relevance to everyday life problems. And the best way to do that is as problems come up, say, okay, here's the math tool to use for this. You want to share cookies? We got to use division. If you want to measure this box for the post office to find out how much postage will be, well, we got to teach volume. Let's use volume tool here. So it has to be relevant to kids. And in schools, it's not very relevant, or online, it's not very relevant. So children learn the formulas, they learn how to add fractions, but they don't know how it applies to real life problems. That's what's missing in our curriculum. So at this age, yes, they do learn better through experiential, but they also can add that paper-based theoretical understanding. They're ready. So they can learn to analyze. So they realize things aren't all black and white anymore. There's gray areas, there's different opinions. And those are all wonderful, wonderful. Here's an example where we got half a cheesecake for a birthday party. And we looked at it and thought, that doesn't look like a half a cheesecake. And so I said to the kids, okay, now we use pie. Let's figure this out on paper. And when we figured it out on paper, we realized, yes, we did. We did the math, and it really sunk in. All my kids are now in their 18 to 30. They still remember this because it was so experiential. Absolutely. So grade 8 in Alberta education is a great grade to transition from unschooling to paper math, to learning all the math concepts in that year. It's fabulous. Good year to learn it. They have enough brain power to understand the formulas, the computation. And yes, they can learn 8 grades of math in 1 year. Many unschoolers do this. These are things they learn through play from ages 0 to 13. All these things they learn through play. And more things they learn through play. And then at 13, these things are more theoretical. This is where you can't see it, you can't touch it, but you know it exists through formulas. This is when they're ready to start that, 13. Okay, and that kind of coincides with that last leap of development of that prefrontal cortex. So best education options for teenagers are government schools. Now you have that whole range you could choose. The blended of the combination of print-based, classroom, online, depending on your child. Maybe they like an online class for math, but a more classroom class for social studies so they can discuss things with other kids. You can still do homeschooling. Co-ops are really handy this way. When we did English and social studies for high school, we rented library rooms once a week, got together, got the kids to watch a movie or discuss a poem or a song or some text out of English. And it was fun for them. It was social. They ended up laughing a lot. It was one parent that took turns facilitating it, and they got to discuss with other kids, which is often missing in online classes. Online classes force kids to write 2 discussion points. Well, they just do it to get the marks. They don't care. They get the job done. Whereas it's not the same as a classroom where you're discussing things, or as a family around the dinner table where you're talking about topics of the day. So you can still provide that while you're home educating. Yes, you can still unschool. You can unschool all through high school if you want. If they don't want marks and credits, you just continue following the 22 solo outcomes. You can do online courses here or micro schools. So teenagers have the best range of options, absolutely, for that age. Okay, I'm not going to talk much about the rest of this. What if they play video games all day? I am a proponent. I think video games are very educational. My 5 played them way too much. And maybe that's why they're all in STEM careers, who knows? But don't worry about addiction. In normal, healthy, caring families, the incidence of addiction to internet and video games is minuscule, no matter how much time kids spend on screens. This was a day I told the kids, you know what? I've had it. You guys go outside and play, leave the games, go out. And it was super quiet, right? So I went outside and I went, where are they? And there they are on the deck playing Wii remotes through a ½ inch of glass through the patio windows. Smart kids. And they learn a lot of things through video games too. They really do. Cooperation, commitment, teamwork, critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, and innovation. And believe me, those are in the Alberta programs of study, in all across cross-curricular. It's also in the 22 solo outcomes of home ed too. So they do have a place. Okay, so just to recap, best education options for 0 to 6 for children's developmental age is play, 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 play. By the way, this is a StarCraft cake one of my kids did for their Foods 30 project. They got credit for that. It's fun too. Age 6 to 12, anything that's experiential and hands-on, interactive. If it's a classroom, if it's home education, if it's unschooling, if you're using curriculum, use it, but minimize the paper for this age. If you have a worksheet on fractions and your child doesn't want to do the worksheet, get in the kitchen. Best way to teach fractions. Make cookies, make pizzas, show them how 5/12 and 5/12 add up, and then show them on the paper. Make sure they have that experiential experience because it sticks more. 13 to 20, now they're more abstract. They have their critical thinking skills. Then they can do more print-based, online, and paper-based studies. Okay. And of course, classroom and interactive. Yes. When I teach at conferences, I get crowds doing things every 10 minutes because they don't want to sit there and listen to a talking head. I wish I could do it this way too, but I can't. So you want to make it, the more interactive it is, the more it sticks in their long-term learning. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to close and I'm going to say, does learning ever stop? Look at these teenagers building on a beach. It never stops, ever. You can't force a child to learn and you can't stop a child from learning. Absolutely not. So I talk about these things. I definitely go into brain development in my book, but I want to end with this lovely poem that I love. It's by Anonymous. I tried to teach my child with words. They often passed him by unheard. I tried to teach my child with books. He only gave me puzzled looks. Despairingly, I turned aside. How can I teach this child? I cried. Into my hand, he placed the key. Come, he said, and play with me. So being responsive to your children and knowing what they want. Okay, so I am going to open it up to questions, and we're a meeting, so you can write your questions in the chat box if you like, or if you want to unmute and just say, hey, Judy. Okay, so go for it.
I've got a 12-year-old who also had special needs, that sort of thing.
Okay, so let your unschoolers be bored. You're shifting ownership of education from you giving it to them taking it on. And that's what schools do starting in grade 7 is they shift that onus or responsibility from the teacher worrying about their education to the child worrying about their education. And that's an important transition. So, and you want your kids to get that before high school because it's not your job to nag them and force them. Yes, they need your support, I think, but they don't need your motivation. That motivation must come internally and it must be driven by what they want to learn. And sometimes that's created by boredom. So don't jump in and fill in that space. Let them be bored. Put your earplugs in to the whining. If they're really bored, give them chores. Great way for them to find something else to do. And if they get on video games or watch YouTube, it's still educational. They are still learning things. Absolutely. Yes, thank you. I have a whole chapter on video games and what kids learn through video games in my book. With the help of my kids, I said, okay, what did you learn through playing Call of Duty? Or what did you learn through playing Roblox? Actually, one of my sons now is working for a major video game manufacturer in a career job. So all those years paid off. Yay. Okay. Deborah says, after reading Judy's book, I have let up on the video games and found the other day my son is coding Minecraft script for mods, self-taught from YouTube. Great example. Absolutely. Modding games is so creative and problem solving. Absolutely. And it's internally driven, so there's no motivation problems whatsoever. Absolutely. Okay, anybody else? Any more questions? Maybe we're going to wrap up. So feel free to come to our next speaker. Next is Cynthia. She's on at 9:30. It's a different link. Every speaker has a different link. And she's going to talk about connection without compliance. So that should be interesting. Okay, all righty. So I am going to then sign off. It doesn't look like we have any more questions. So thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoyed this. And there's lots of education options out there. Just basic, keep in mind your child's temperament, how willing they are to sit and listen. Keep in mind your child's personality. Do they want structure? Do they want freedom? Keep in mind your child's age. Age and brain development is the biggie. How well can they sit, pay attention, concentrate? But keep in mind that experiential learning works for everyone, adults too. So, okay, thank you and have a great day.